Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, that's better. The unintended themes of my services this fall have turned out to be things I used to be skeptical about, but later embraced. Captain America, tarot cards, even Christianity with our community service. Such is the same for masculinity and me. You see, if you're a progressive person who believes that it's important to smash the patriarchy, you might have a complicated relationship with masculinity too, especially if you are masculine in some way. And I'll take this moment to remind us that masculinity isn't something limited to men. Women and non-binary people can be masculine too. Now, when you hear that you, like me, when you hear that we can all be masculine, you probably nod your head along. Yes, anyone can be masculine. But what is masculinity? That's the harder question, right? So I want to start my message with kind of a tricky thought experiment. I want you to think about what words you associate with masculinity. Keep them inside, but sort of notice what comes up for you. When I do this exercise, some of the words that I associate with masculinity are toxic, fragile, not great words that people want to associate with. I imagine repressed feelings, anger, violence, bros. But there's something else that I associate with masculinity, me. And I like to think I'm not these words most of the time. Does anybody else here associate with the word masculinity? Anyone? Some people? A few? Everybody's like, maybe, a little. It's fine. You're in a safe space. I mean, as safe as we can make it, right? That's not a real thing, but we can move on. You see, if somebody calls me masculine, I literally get a warm, fuzzy feeling inside, like I've been truly seen. And as much as I also feel those negative words, I try to embody as much as possible what we might call healthy masculinity, because I like being masculine. So I hope that there's something redeemable about it. Although I will say this up front, that I don't always succeed. The pull of patriarchal masculinity is strong. But like everything in our gendered culture, this word masculinity is hard to pin down. The ideas of masculinity change over time and from culture to culture, just like femininity, just like what it means to be a man or a woman or non-binary or any other gendered word you can think of. It's socially constructive, but that doesn't mean that it's not meaningful. Masculinity is the expected attributes and characteristics associated with men. Often, in practice, however, that means defining oneself against so-called feminine attributes of love, friendship, emotions, vulnerability, in favor of being stoic, dominant, competitive, aggressive. Author Jared Yates Sexton says of his experience growing up as a boy, deep down, I realized that masculinity as I knew it, as it was presented to me, was a lie. The title of this service is Masculinity from the Inside Out, in part because we're using these texts from women, Black women, in fact, both Beyonce and Bell Hooks as entry points, but also because some of us involved in this service do identify as masculine in some form. I am a transgender man, which means that I spent the first 27 years of my life experiencing the world with everyone seeing me as a girl or a woman. It means that I have different experiences from most cisgender men, those who were born male, in both what I consider good and bad ways. Bell Hooks talks in her book, The Will to Change Men, Masculinity, and Love, which we read from earlier, about how much men are policed by patriarchy to suppress their feelings other than anger, to cut themselves off from deep emotions, from friendships, particularly with other men. Men are often only able to share this kind of intimacy with their spouses or people they're in relationships with, as opposed to close friends. Intimacy is not seen as strong enough, vulnerability as feminine. Now, as much as we talk about the privileges that men have, particularly white men, and I know this is true because I'm one of them, there is also a crisis of masculinity that hurts not only men, but all of us. Because of this message that to be masculine means anger and no other feelings, no other emotions. It means violence and sex, but not tenderness, parenthood, and cooperation. And this idea of masculinity is so prevalent that when men don't conform to it, they are often punished. They are often punished for that. But if they do conform, it hurts their mental health. In The Man They Wanted Me to Be, Toxic Masculinity and a Crisis of Our Own Making, author Jared Yates Sexton writes of his own experiences. Very quickly, I discovered the fraternity of masculinity was easy to enter, as long as you don't mind changing everything about yourself and following the tenets mindlessly. That's got to have an impact on one's mental health. In fact, a joint study by Indiana University and Singapore's Nanyang Technological University found that displaying traditional signs of masculinity, such as not showing emotions unless they are anger or not relying on others, was strongly correlated with poor mental health. But this is a crisis that doesn't just impact men alone. Let me give you some statistics. Men are arrested for 80% of violent crimes, according to the US Department of Justice. Now, of course, I think it's important to note that there is gender along with racial bias in arrests, with Black men being the most likely to be arrested and white women being the least likely. But let's consider something else we are all very familiar with, unfortunately. Mass shootings. Almost all perpetrators of mass shootings are male. Why is that? Toxic masculinity? The idea that violence and rage are the only way to get out your feelings if you're a man? But the toxicity of masculinity isn't limited to hurting others. Men die by suicide at 4 times the rate of women, according to the CDC. 4 times. Toxic masculinity is literally killing men from the inside out. Now, I'm not trying to excuse violence or abuse. That's not something that we can make excuses for. But I'm trying to get us to see a larger picture here that we all need to be liberated from patriarchy. As a man and what I would consider to be a masculine person, I feel fortunate because I didn't grow up with a lot of these same taboos of seeking help or expressing my feelings or having friends. And I'm eternally grateful for that. In fact, my own journey towards accepting my gender identity as a man involved becoming comfortable with the fact that I was a feminine man. And while there are parts of that experience of being trans that I wouldn't wish on anyone, especially those societal pieces, I'm eternally grateful to be who I am, in part because I didn't have to experience the repression that so many men face as children and the pressure to express masculinity in a toxic way. And I want to reiterate something that Bell Hooks says. In an anti-patriarchal culture, males do not have to prove their value and worth. They know from birth that simply being gives them value, the right to be cherished and loved. But here's the question, if this is how we teach masculinity and what's associated with it, is it possible to be masculine and healthy, to actually celebrate masculinity? I like to hope that it is. But it might involve changing what we think of as masculine. Okay, I'm going to pull out another study here, a study published by the American Psychological Association. Now, it was published in 1990, so it was before some of you were born, and I want you to take it with a grain of salt. In this study, they tested how much testosterone a man has and what their profession is. The profession where men had the highest testosterone was, can anybody guess? Good guess. His guess was police, for anybody who heard that. Professional football players. And the profession with the least testosterone. Any guesses? So many choices, I can't hear any of them. Minister. I love that. Okay, so I think it's particularly funny because I'm a man and I take testosterone, and then I became a profession with the least testosterone. Now, studies are imperfect, and also anecdotes can't refute them, but here's an anecdote anyways about testosterone and ministers. If you know anything about transgender people, you could guess that I take testosterone. So I have this lovely beard and deep, deep voice. Every 2 weeks, I inject myself with an amount of testosterone that makes it so I have testosterone levels that are on par with somebody who makes their own testosterones. So my testosterone levels aren't in fact that low, despite being a minister. They're pretty much in the middle. And when I started taking testosterone, many people warned me that I might get aggressive, angry, and snappy, and mean even. Roid rage, they call it. And so I expected it. Men are more aggressive after all, right? Must be the testosterone. Except that never happened to me. If anything, the feeling of being more comfortable in my body made me calmer, more at peace with myself, less aggressive, if anything. And rage has never been a part of it. So I'm inclined to disbelieve any of these men are just naturally more violent, more rageful, more angry words, and leave it up to our cultural conditioning and feelings that makes it much harder for masculine people to develop close and loving relationships, where emotional labor is equally divided and care is taken for our own emotional selves. Furthermore, I think this is important to point out, a University of California study found that playing football increases testosterone. So perhaps that's why they have so much. Okay, let's look at something else. You are probably familiar with the hashtag not all men. Yes. It's often used in a context where men feel things like they are getting lumped in with men who do bad things. For example, a woman or non-binary person might say, I don't feel safe around men, not as safe as I do around women. Men sometimes sexually assault people. Then a man will come in and say, not all men, as if the fact that some men don't sexually assault matters in these situations. Women began a response on social media that was the hashtag, yes, all women. As in, sure, not all men are bad, but all women have been sexually assaulted or harassed or are afraid of it. Now, these hashtags reached the height of their popularity exactly as I was beginning my transition and coming out as a man. And I weirdly found myself relating to both hashtags. Not all men, because I wasn't going to become a man who assaulted people, who was creepy and scary and angry, I hoped. But having been seen in the world as a woman, I had been sexually harassed by men. It happened to me on dates and at work, and my masculine appearance didn't save me or protect me from the male gaze and expression of power over that I, as an assumed woman, was subject to. And here's the thing, I've been objectified as a man and when I was seen as a woman by both men and women in ways that were deeply uncomfortable and violating to me. But most of the time, no matter what gender I was perceived as, it was by a man. Now, this breaks this down a little again is because men are innately unable to control their urges. I don't believe that. In fact, the idea of that is so inherently offensive to men. I certainly don't need to. But masculinity and entitlement to sexuality are so intertwined that there's even a movement around it called incels or involuntary celibates. They're men who are so angry at women for not giving them what they need sexually, a movement that takes its rage and points itself outside of themselves. Okay, so there are plenty of examples of toxic masculinity, but what about healthy masculinity? I'm heartened to know that there are men doing this work. Jared Yates Sexton, who I quoted earlier, talks about his experiences with toxic masculinity and growing up poor and working class. J.J. Bola talks in his book, Masks Off, Masculinity Refined, about the intersections of being masculine and Black. And what people are saying and finding is that masculinity isn't in and of itself the problem, but a certain flavor of masculinity, one that encourages men to suppress their feelings. It gives them this entitlement because of it. So does that mean that we should give all men a pass when they're violent? Quite the opposite, actually. But it also means that we need to, in addition to all of this, encourage men to love not only others, but themselves, to express their feelings, to understand that to do so is a form of strength. Now, when I was talking to RD's parents, Kate and Rich, hope it's okay, I'm talking about you in the sermon. I realized I didn't discuss that with you, so sorry. About what day would be for their son's child dedication, I mentioned that the topic today would be masculinity, and Kate agreed that was perfect because they wanted to raise a boy with healthy masculinity. And I agree, I really appreciated that. I thought it was such a nice way to tie these together. And one of the readings that they gave me for this service resonated so well for what we want for our masculine children, for all of our children. So I'm going to read it to you again so that you can hold in your mind the image of RD or any other child you know, masculine or not, boy or not. You are my hope. our hope. You are starting out fresh. You have a chance to do right, to listen to the voices, to accept the gifts, to love despite wrong, you and your friends. Although you, like us, will make mistakes, you can do better than we have. Choose peace, choose justice, choose compassion, choose beauty, choose love. Our hopes and dreams rest in you. They are our gift. Use them well. This is the antidote, right, to toxic masculinity. Teaching our children, all our children, that compassion is worthwhile, that beauty is for everyone, that justice is all of our work, that love of each other and ourselves is one of the most important things, if not the most important thing we can do. And that it is all of our jobs to honor that, to love the masculine as they are, the boys and men, without giving them a pass on violence and aggressive behavior, rather teaching each other to value that the masculine strength that comes from loving other humans, by tenderly holding our children, no matter what their gender is, by showing and expecting dads to be just as good parents as anyone else, by giving examples of positive masculinity for our children to follow, by teaching our children, our boys and our girls and our non-binary children, that you can look up to people of any gender. This isn't just men's job, by the way. All of us are stewards of this next generation and have a role in shifting these gendered expectations. As Unitarian Universalists who believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, that means that we have to love the masculine within, to encourage self-compassion so that men and masculine people can learn that love is the center, the core of who we are as humans, that our most fulfilling relationships are centered on love and reciprocity rather than power over. I know that this change is possible, that all people, men, women, non-binary people, agender people, masculine, feminine, and neither, can learn to love each other for truly being who they are, to stop forcing others into boxes based on how we believe them to be, and to love our children simply for being, not because they have to prove themselves. So I send my love to all of you today and celebrate those examples of healthy masculinity that are all around us, in the fathers that lovingly support their children, and the men who go against the grain in their friendships and relationships, and the queer masculinities that show us that being masculine doesn't have to define itself against the feminine, and all the men who go to therapy when they need it for their own mental health, and women and non-binary people who show us that there are so many ways to be masculine. There is another way. And so slowly, carefully, let us work to create this world together. May it be so, and let us say together, amen. Amen. Now's the time in our service where we are going